4 Su-25s flew at 160 feet in 1986, disguised on radar as a lumbering An-12 transport. It was an illegal crossing into Pakistani airspace, with no authorization and no announcement. They made 4 passes over a Mujahideen training camp near Peshawar, and then they were gone before PAF fighters could scramble. The mission was classified for over 25 years. The plane nobody talks about just ran the most audacious strike of the entire war. Underneath the Su-25's battered camouflage sits a 595-kilogram shell of titanium alloy, welded and bolted into a monocoque bathtub that wraps the pilot from the front instrument panel to behind the seat. This is not decorative armor. Ghost certified test data from 1977 confirm that 23mm armor-piercing rounds, the kind fired from ZSU-23 Shilka cannons, flatten or shatter on impact at 500 meters. The titanium shell is lined with secondary steel plates, raising the total protective envelope to the equivalent of 50 millimeters of rolled steel. On the shop floor, every kilogram counts. The armor's mass was debated and measured, not guessed. Soviet Design Bureau drawings show the bathtub as a detachable module, with each panel numbered for field replacement. Flanking the armored core, 2 Tumansky R195 turbojets push out 44.2 kilonewtons of thrust each. The engines are separated by a fireproof barrier, and each is plumbed with its own fuel, oil, and hydraulic lines. If a fire is detected, the sensor reads 400 degrees Celsius for more than 2 seconds, and the fire separation unit triggers. A spring-loaded actuator shears the affected engine's mount, isolating the nacelle and venting fuel overboard. This system was not theoretical. In 1987, a Su-25 limped home on one engine after an SA-7 strike, the fire separation unit having done its job. Fuel tanks are sealed with a rubberized liner and filled with polyurethane foam, density 30 kilograms per cubic meter. When a round punches through, the foam expands and the liner swells, cutting leakage to under 5% of total capacity. A 12.7mm hit might leave a dent, but it rarely leaves a fire. The cockpit, the engines, and the fuel cells are all designed for the same purpose: keep the pilot alive, keep the jet flying, even when the valley lights up with tracers. The numbers are not decoration, they are the difference between walking away and vanishing into the mountains. The next story is written in the gaps between those armor plates. Soviet planners did not just build the Su-25 to survive hits. They expected it to live and fight where other jets would not dare to fly. The doctrine was blunt. Attack from below 1,000 meters, use the land itself as cover, and never present a clean shot to the enemy. The 1978 flight manual spells it out. The minimum safe altitude was 150 feet, with attack runs as low as the valley floor allowed. Every feature on the Frogfoot answers to this rule. The manual control lever sits within easy reach, ready to cut hydraulics and revert to cable and rod if a shell ruptures the lines. No computer intermediaries, no delay. When the cockpit shakes with impact, the pilot pulls and the stick is suddenly heavy but still alive. The GSH-32 twin-barrel cannon is another product of this thinking. It is mounted close to the centerline, shielded by the titanium tub, and delivers 250 rounds at 2,500 rounds per minute, enough to cut through trucks or dug in positions in the seconds before the aircraft must climb again. Ammunition feeds are armored, and the gun's recoil is absorbed by reinforced spars. Soviet designers chose this over lighter, less protected options for one reason. Ground attack at point-blank range is unforgiving. Terrain masking is not a suggestion, it is the first law. In Afghanistan, the valleys run narrow and deep, with ridges that block radar and break up the line of sight from DSHK and ZSU-23 positions. The Su-25's straight wings and high lift let it bank hard, threading the gorge at 700 kilometers per hour, then pop up for a single shot before dropping back into cover. Doctrine and hardware meet in the cockpit, where the margins are measured in meters and seconds. The next chapter unfolds in those gaps, where terrain, steel, and nerves decide who makes it back. The numbers on paper look almost abstract: over 60,000 combat sorties logged by Su-25s in Afghanistan between 1981 and 1989. In practice, it meant a grind measured in hours, not days. Crews flew 4, sometimes 6 missions in a single day, often returning to base with the engines still ticking from the last run. The ledgers from Shindand and Bagram airfields show the rhythm: briefing at dawn, wheels up, valley ingress, ordnance off, wheels down, refuel, rearm, repeat. The valleys set the rules. Soviet doctrine demanded attack runs at altitudes rarely above 160 feet, sometimes lower, hugging the contours so tightly that a moment's inattention meant granite or a sudden wall of tracers. Pilots kept one eye on the altimeter, the other on the winding riverbed, trusting the titanium bathtub to buy them seconds if the valley lit up. Standard loadout was a workman's kit: S-8 rockets in wing pods, PTAB fragmentation bomblets for convoys, and the GSH-32 cannon loaded to the stops. The S-8s, up to 16 per jet, were the daily bread, saturating tree lines and ravines where Mujahideen waited with DSHKs or the older SA-7s. Each sortie was a test of habit and nerve. The flight manual's 150-foot minimum was not a suggestion, it was survival math. At that height, the ground comes fast, and the enemy's window to fire is measured in heartbeats. There was no hero's welcome at the end of a mission, just a checklist, a new assignment, and the knowledge that the doctrine was holding, for now. The scale was relentless and impersonal, but every number in the logbook meant a crew that made it back, or didn't. The next threat was already waiting, just beyond the next ridge. Alexander Rutskoy strapped into his Su-25 with the knowledge that armor was measured in millimeters. But survival came down to seconds. In June 1984, over the Panjshir Valley, a DSHK heavy machine gun cut loose from a ravine wall. The burst caught the rear of his cockpit, 12.7mm slugs punching through the titanium and steel, shattering control rods and filling the air with the smell of hot metal. The stick went heavy. Rutskoy fought the aircraft down, guiding it onto a dirt strip with only partial control. Ground crews later counted the holes. The titanium shell had absorbed most of the energy, and the pilot walked away. That airframe never flew again. 4 years later, the threat had changed. On September 25, 1988, Rutskoy led a strike near the Afghan-Pakistani border. Pakistani radar picked up his formation. An F-16 closed from the south, launching an R-60 missile at 3 kilometers. The warhead struck the left engine inlet, turning the nacelle into a torch. At 1,200 meters, Rutskoy pulled the ejection handle. The canopy blew. He drifted down into Pakistani territory, boots on the ground, before the jet had finished burning. Pakistani security forces captured him within hours. The International Committee of the Red Cross recorded his arrival in Quetta. For 10 days, he was a bargaining chip, interrogated, photographed, and inspected for wounds. On October 5th, the Red Cross handed him back to Soviet officials at the border. Meanwhile, American and Pakistani intelligence teams combed the crash site. They recovered fragments of the titanium bathtub and pieces of the R-195 engine fire separation unit. DIA analysts later noted that the armor had limited the missile blast to the engine compartment, leaving the cockpit largely intact. Rutskoy's survival was not luck. It was the sum of every kilogram of metal, every design memo, every field repair. But even that margin was narrowing. The next threat would not respect armor, or doctrine, or habit. September 1986 rewrote the rules. The FIM-92. Stinger entered the valleys, an American-made shoulder-fired missile with an all-aspect seeker that could lock onto a target from any direction in just 2 seconds. Its reach stretched nearly 4 kilometers, far beyond the safe zones mapped in Soviet manuals. The first confirmed Su-25 kill came within days of the Stinger's arrival. Losses climbed overnight from 2 or 3 aircraft each month to 8, sometimes 9. CIA loss tables for that autumn chart the spike in cold numbers. The reality was felt on the flight line. Pilots who had trusted terrain and titanium now faced a weapon that erased both. Every takeoff became a gamble against a missile that needed no warning, no rear aspect shot, just a fleeting heat signature. The cockpit, once a fortress, was now a hunted place. The old doctrine was broken. The next move would have to be made at altitude. Directive 12086 landed with the force of a hammer. All Su-25s were ordered to keep above 4,500 meters over hostile valleys. The old doctrine to hug the ground and trust the titanium was out. Pilots who had learned to read the rivers and ridgelines now had to climb high, where every move was visible and the margin for error shrank to seconds. The General Staff's papers spelled out the new math. Laser-guided KH-25ML and KH-29L missiles would replace the old S-8 rocket runs. Training centers at Kubinka and Kansk ran emergency conversion courses. In the first quarter after the order, sortie rates dipped by 12% as crews adapted to the new weapons and altitude. The Su-25 became a technician's war machine, less a flying tank and more a precision tool. But the valleys still waited below, and not every threat could be met from the sky. On the 13th of November, 1986, 4 Sukhoi Su-25s from the 378th OSHAP crossed into Pakistani airspace at 160 feet, boxed tight to mimic the radar signature of an Antonov An-12 transport. The flight plan was written in code and delivered by hand. Each pilot carried 2 KH-25ML missiles and a full rack of S-8 rockets. The target was a supply depot near Peshawar, stacked with Soviet-made shells bound for the other side of the border. The strike was over in seconds. 70% of the munitions destroyed, the ground still burning as the formation turned for home. Islamabad's protest landed in Moscow within hours. The Soviet reply was 4 words: technical navigation error, full stop. No escalation, no admission. The mission stayed classified for decades. The lesson was clear. Boldness had its own risks, and sometimes the only answer was to fly lower, faster, and trust the silence that followed. The Stinger changed everything. Titanium and doctrine met a heat seeker built for the age of portable ambush. Today, battlefield skies are ruled by whoever adapts first, not by armor, not by tradition. Combat is never static, and survival always demands reinvention. Let me know what you think below.